What's going on, everybody? It is that time again, the Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 92 on this Friday, June 21st, 2024. I think it's the first day of summer. I'm not a big solstice guy. I think that's the first day of summer. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy. We are 70 days from the season opener, Oklahoma and Temple in late August. ChampU BBQ is this weekend. It's already underway in a lot of ways. Full breakdown with our lead recruiting analyst, Collin Kennedy here. The names to watch, the ones that are most interesting. Oklahoma could close the gap on. We're going to get into all of it on the program here today. We also have an update for you on 2026 stud quarterback Jaden O'Neal. And then we're going to wrap up the camp season for the month of June at Oklahoma. The last two camps for this week on Tuesday and then yesterday. Collin and I were both there. We had some standouts, both in terms of commits and some guys who picked up offers this week. We'll talk about it a little bit on the back end. Do want to also make sure we get in right off the top. ChampU BBQ special right now at Sooners Illustrated. 60% off on your VIP membership to Sooners Illustrated. It goes through Monday, I believe. So you got a few days here for ChampU BBQ. Phenomenal time. I mean, it's really, if you're on the fence at all, this is the time. 60% off, and it's ChampU BBQ weekend. So the intel is going to be flowing in. Media days is coming up. The season's coming up. We're all over transfer portal stuff for some of the other sports. It's the right time. It's the right time to do it now. Become a VIP member. Head on over to the site. There's more information there about what the deal entails and all that. But go check that out. That's a great time to jump aboard and become a VIP member right now. On that note, ChampU BBQ, like we said, that's what the special's for. That's where, of course, we're going to start. We can kind of break this up in a lot of different ways. Let's just start with offense, defense first. We'll go with offense. Obviously, there's a lot of guys coming into town. First off, Collin, do you have like a rough estimate on the number, the total number of guys that are going to be here this weekend?
It'll be about 23 to 25 recruits maximum.
Big group, yeah.
On campus in Norman this weekend. That's including both targets and commits for Oklahoma, which is going to create a pretty incredible dynamic. Talked about it on the radio the other day, but I do want to mention it right off the top here. This is like one of the biggest recruiting events of the summer every single year. And that's kind of well known.
Yeah.
We know what kind of fireworks are created coming out of the ChampU BBQ. But why I want to mention that to your question, not only are some elite talents that this Oklahoma coaching staff really wants going to be in Norman this weekend, but OU's coaching staff is going to have about 12 of its commitments helping them out to recruit these guys during one of the biggest events of the year. Mm-hmm. You can't always recruit everyone at once. You can't have these significant individual moments with all these different recruits all in one place. But not only is there going to be a number of elite talents uncommitted, OU's pledges being around for this one too, huge for OU. And we're going to see what kind of recruiting momentum they can generate.
Yeah, like you said, it's a huge weekend. It has been for a number of years, even going back to, obviously, the Lincoln Riley tenure. It's been this big weekend of the summer. It has been for a long time. It continues to be. So we'll start, like I said, offensively. There's a number of guys on both sides of football. We're not going to be able to get into every single guy, which is, again, why you become a VIP subscriber. Colin's got the list of visitors there with some quick hitter thoughts on each guy. And it's going to be updating, how things are going over the course of the weekend. But we will get into some, obviously, here on the program. We'll start offensively. What are maybe some names on that side of the football that are of notable intrigue to you as far as kind of seeing how things go, what kind of impression Oklahoma can make or gap they can close, whatever, however you want to take that?
Yeah, I think you have to start with five-star offensive tackle Andrew Babalola, right?
Yeah.
Affectionately nicknamed Babs by all of us at 24/7 Sports. I believe Cooper Patagna, Tom Loy, Andrew Ivins are guys that do the 24/7 Sports college football recruiting podcast. Folks, you should give it a listen, OU fans, if you haven't stumbled upon it. They do a great job talking about the recruiting landscape, but they're a huge fan of Andrew Babalola. And, of course, two of those guys are some of our scouting department heads. Andrew Babalola, a consensus five-star, I believe, at this point. Truly an elite talent. And he doesn't get talked about a ton, which is why I want to highlight him right off the top, because we know some of the headliners that typically are involved with OU. You've got your Lamont Rogers, who was just in town for his official visit. You've got your Michael Fasusi, who was in for his official visit the weekend prior. Ty Haywood has long been discussed as it relates to Oklahoma. But Andrew Babalola fascinating. He hasn't been playing football long. I think the thing for him, many would believe it would be the developmental aspect, right? You're talking about a guy who moved from basketball to football, made that transition in about a 2-year span, and quickly became one of the elite prospects in the 2025 cycle. You would think he'd be looking at schools as far as how they can further his game. And I definitely think that's appropriate, Josh. Like, that's part of the equation. But also, it's been well documented by a number of our reporters at 24/7 Sports. Andrew Babalola and his family are very keen on the academic side of the equation. Obviously, the ChampU BBQ, you're doing a lot of fun stuff. You're playing different games, you're eating good food, you're going on a scavenger hunt, whatever. But they do get into the nitty-gritty, and there's going to be presentations on the academic side of the university. And so Andrew Babalola, why I bring that up, not only are academics huge for him and his family, but academics are huge for, from what I see, the two primary contenders outside of Oklahoma. This is kind of Stanford and Michigan at the top. Not in that order either. I think Michigan made a huge surge for Andrew Babalola. Stanford was kind of seen as the leader going into that visit, and now the Wolverines and the Cardinal are kind of that top two, and they offer a ton. Obviously, that Stanford degree, working in recruiting as long as I have, I feel like some fans scoff at that concept, but I have literally been around recruits dating back to my high school days where high-level recruits would talk about how valuable that Stanford degree is. And now that coaching staff out there now that's taken over the program for the Cardinal, they've got some things rolling a little bit, some good commitments. Stanford's a very viable option for Andrew Babalola. And then, of course, Michigan, elite academics, but also Sharon Moore, former Oklahoma product, right? Taking over the head coach spot, elite track record of development along the offensive line. Michigan's a national championship winning program, a lot rolling here in the Wolverines' favor as it relates to a 5-star offensive tackle who's looking for not only the academic side, but the development side. So Michigan, a serious threat. Oklahoma is going to have to sell Bill Bedenbaugh heavily, but OU is going to have to also make sure that Babalola and his family are all aboard for the academic side of this thing. And if they are, OU could make some noise with this being his final official visit. We'll see the timeline, not necessarily anything firm or set, but I don't see this one trickling into the fall. I do think Andrew Babalola would probably prefer to wrap something up maybe July or August. So that's the first one on the offensive side of the ball. And then to go from 5-star to a 3-star guy who I think is going to have a ton of eyeballs on him going into this weekend, Josh. We talk about him a time or two. He's kind of the center of attention at the wide receiver position because Emmanuel Choice is the only wideout on campus uncommitted going into the weekend. Manny Choice is someone who I think Texas A&M has really surged for.
Yeah.
TCU has always been in the equation. They're close to home. The Horned Frogs have long prioritized him. And speaking of former Oklahoma products who are now in the coaching realm, don't forget OU's wide receiver coach. If you go look him up, he's got a little thing or two to say about receiver development. And so I think that Emmanuel Choice was once kind of seen as someone who would eventually end up in Oklahoma's class. I don't think that's the case anymore. So what does that mean for this weekend? Well, OU and Emmanuel Choice are really going to have to evaluate each other because Andrew Marsh is no longer visiting this weekend. So that takes a big name off the board, at least for now. Obviously, OU landed Marcus Harris for the receiver class, so now another spot is occupied, but Cortez Mills is also still very much out there and available. OU is in pursuit of him. So you kind of get the sense that we're really down that final stretch. We're turning third in terms of that receiver room, and Emmanuel Choice coming into town this weekend, I think it's massive because we're going to find out one way or another this guy is truly going to be what he was once thought of in the whole recruiting sphere.
Yeah, definitely a couple of really fascinating guys to watch there because, you know, we talked about it. You mentioned it. Bill Bedenbaugh right now, he's big game hunting. I mean, there's a lot of big guys. We talked about Fasusi, obviously, was here this week. And, you know, you mentioned Lamont Rogers. So you mix in Babalola, who, has got these, like you said, Michigan, Auburn, Missouri, Stanford in there. That's going to be a big one. And then, we've been talking about the Emmett Jones. Again, I'm hesitant to call it a heater because it's just what he's done quite literally since he's been here. But he just landed Marcus Harris earlier this week. Just him trying to continue that is going to be fun to watch as well. So a couple of names there. On the defensive side, what about that side of the football? Obviously, Oklahoma's had a lot of momentum. There's a couple of guys here that we've talked about a pretty good deal on the show before that will be making their way in this weekend. Where does your attention lie on that side of the football as the ChampU BBQ gets going here today?
Freshly off a decommitment from USC, 5-star, number 1 ranked edge rusher, Isaiah Gibson.
Big one.
Expected in Norman this weekend. And I think a lot of people will look at this one and say, why is he visiting Oklahoma? I believe he was just at Ohio State. I know a number of other programs are involved. And then, of course, Georgia has long kind of been seen as the program he would inevitably land with. But when I went out to Under Armour Atlanta and went to that combine in Georgia, I got to spend some one-on-one time with Isaiah Gibson, and he was fresh off a junior day visit at OU. And I also got to meet his mother, who raved about the experience at Oklahoma. She thoroughly enjoyed the trip. I think it really opened her eyes up to what life would be like for her son out in Norman, Oklahoma. And then Isaiah, speaking to him, the most profound thing he had to say was that Miguel Chavis was arguably his strongest relationship in his recruitment at the time. It was right up there with Chidera Uzo-Diribe at Georgia, who at one point was visiting his high school 3 times a week, right? Like it really became a case where Miguel Chavis alone was kind of opening the door for Oklahoma to get into the mix with Isaiah Gibson. But of course, he would take a visit to USC and then commit. Well, now back on the open market, available recruit. I think Isaiah Gibson is definitely one where you're going to have to cover a lot of ground. This is an elite player from the Southeast. He's also a great guy. Like, he's personable, so he's always going to be willing to hear programs out and communicate with them as far as like what their vision is for him, which is going to make things a little bit more cloudy. But that also allows Oklahoma this weekend, especially if he gets to campus and arrives at OU, Isaiah Gibson will hear Miguel Chavis out. And if what I assume is going to happen takes place, and you're going to have Brent Venables pull Isaiah Gibson into that head coach's office for that signature meeting, who knows what happens next, right? So, look, the defensive line board is fascinating to me for Oklahoma right now. There are way more names than I probably anticipated being the case out there for OU as we're trying to sort through this thing, especially with the number of guys that they have committed. And I know a few will be in town. If you're Oklahoma, it's just kind of like, man, why not take your shot at the number 1 ranked edge player in the country? Because you know that he likes your program. You know that he likes your coaching staff. You've got really nothing to lose in this recruitment. So I think Oklahoma is preparing to take a significant shot. Speaking of the defensive line board, though, there are a couple other fascinating names. I want to quickly highlight Max Granville and Smith Arogbo. Those 2 defensive linemen, in my opinion, those recruitments, Josh, are, let me think of the best way to phrase this, not necessarily what some folks think they are. I'm going to put it that way, but I think with those 2 specifically, especially speaking with a lot of folks in and around these recruitments, I think Oklahoma, not only with Isaiah Gibson, who for all intents and purposes is probably a little bit far-fetched, at least on surface level, those 2, even though some think that those recruitments are wrapped up, I don't think that's the case at all. And so Oklahoma will be going after those 2 defensive linemen as well coming up this weekend. But the last guy I want to highlight defensively, we don't really talk about defensive backs anymore, Josh, do we? I mean, the class is kind of rounded out. And I think what we forget is that they do have basically like 1 safety spot remaining. And for the longest time, we thought that was going to be Jonah Williams, right? But I have a crystal ball pick in for Texas A&M for Jonah Williams. I'm still feeling pretty good about that. And, of course, I'm not really expecting Jonah Williams to take an official visit to Oklahoma right now. So what's the pivot point? Well, the pivot point is someone who Oklahoma had interest in even well before the Jonah Williams sweepstakes were ongoing. That's Marion Robinson out of the state of Arkansas. There's a couple layers to this. So Marion Robinson, it's probably Oklahoma in the mix with the in-state Arkansas Razorbacks and then the Oregon Ducks. I think at a time or two, programs like LSU have been involved. But Marion Robinson has loved all of his OU visits in the past. And I think especially back in the spring, to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, there was a time where some folks thought that Oklahoma might be able to pull Marion Robinson out of the state of Arkansas into Oklahoma and bring him into Brandon Hall's safety room. I think this weekend, OU is basically going to go all in to try and round out its defensive back class with a safety prospect like Marion Robinson. And I think there's a real shot for that to take place. Obviously, Arkansas and Oregon, you can't take them lightly. Serious threats for a player like that. But Marion Robinson really admires Oklahoma. I know for months now, not only was that kind of seen as maybe a heavy threat in his recruitment, some folks thought a time or two that maybe he was going to seriously consider taking a pledge to Oklahoma. He's worked through the process, and we'll see what OU can do with one of its final DB targets remaining on the board. And with him in town this weekend for the biggest recruiting events of the summer, it's a real shot at a very talented safety.
Yeah, a number of very interesting guys there on the defensive side. In particular for me, I think Max DeGranville, because that was a guy that it felt like however long ago it was, there was a lot of momentum for, and then it seemed like, okay, where are they kind of at with him? And now he's back in this weekend for this week, and 4-star guy. Just you talk about the relationship with Miguel Chavis. That's one that I'm interested to hear from you after this and see kind of where things are at and how close could Oklahoma be to securing that one, because that's been a fun one to keep an eye on and keep up with. The last several months, going even beyond that. So going to be interesting. Obviously, a lot of talented defensive guys. We'll kind of close the ChampU BBQ again. We're not able to get in every guy. That's why I'm a VIP member, all that stuff. We'll kind of close the ChampU BBQ preview with maybe a name or two if you have it, but a name that you think Oklahoma could close on this weekend, or at least make a big move this weekend that in particular that catches your eye as far as this weekend could be the seal the deal kind of moment in your mind.
Yeah, some fans only judge official visit weekends by the number of commits that actually happen during the weekend.
Sure, right.
It's a little unfair, but hey, to each their own. I do think, though, as it relates to this OV weekend, the ChampU BBQ could be a closing period for none other than in-state high 4-star edge rusher CJ Nixon. I know that's not the most shocking answer, but he just released the top 2 of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. He's already been on his Oklahoma State official visit, to my knowledge. He now heads into the ChampU BBQ weekend. Again, a huge weekend of festivities and whatever else. Yeah. They're going to try and make sure that CJ Nixon stays home. That's going to be the theme of the weekend. I know that the Oklahoma staff is very excited to have CJ Nixon back on campus at a time where his recruitment is kind of heading down that final stretch. And to me, it's like, well, if you're CJ Nixon, not only has Oklahoma always kind of been the perceived leader, at least from a distance, but the opportunity to stay close to home, play for this defensive staff, one that could mold you. CJ Nixon is a lot of traits and tools, but obviously he has a ways to go from a developmental standpoint. We know what he is as a basketball player. What he is at defensive end is the jury's still out. He needs that guidance and development, and so Oklahoma's coaching staff's going to pitch that as well. I think it's going to be a strong sell. But the last thing I'll say, man, is like if you're CJ Nixon, why I think there's a real opportunity for Oklahoma to close, you're looking at some of these names and you're saying, whoa, Isaiah Gibson, Smith Arogbo, Max Granville, Cade Petchak. Shield Knight is already in the boat. The list goes
Yeah.
on and on and on for the edge board. And I do think that Oklahoma would like to take as many defensive linemen as it possibly can ahead of the SEC move. But, hey, man, look, like, math is math, right? So C.J. Nixon, man, this is going to be a big weekend for him. And I think that Oklahoma and Nixon's camp should all go well. There's a very real possibility the Sooners are able to close the gap here and eventually get across the finish line with an elite in-state talent, one of their priority targets.
Yeah, no, we've talked about C.J. Nixon before, down there in Weatherford. He's a guy that I've had the pleasure of seeing both play football and basketball the last couple of years, at the high school level. Raw talent, but an impressive talent. We talked about that before. He's one of the guys that stands out there, and clearly he values wanting to stay in state with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State being that top two. So I'm right there with you. And all the things kind of working in favor of Oklahoma, like you said, the pressure to maybe secure that spot if he can. There's a lot of things working in their favor. Is the basketball aspect for him? Is he just planning to focus on football at the next level? I mean, there was a thought for a long time that he might try to do both. Or is that your understanding, though, that he'll just be a football at the next level, or is Porter Moser in the mix here?
Yeah, I don't expect the OU basketball route here just because it's so hard to do, right?
Oh, it's really hard. Yeah.
Especially with not just the state of C.J. Nixon's football career and where it needs to go and where it will probably go, but also where the OU basketball program is, right? The amount of coverage and all that we've talked about, the way that they're structuring their roster. I just feel like C.J. Nixon and the OU football program is going to essentially be where he hones in on and make sure that he's checking every box as far as what the next step of his career looks like.
100%. So there's a little taste of what to watch for with ChampU BBQ this weekend. Again, I'll pump it again. 60% off right now. Get the full coverage. If you log on right this minute, there's the full list of visitors. Collin has some thoughts about each guy. So that's all there for you. And there's going to be more where that came from throughout the weekend, moving into obviously the rest of the summer. But big weekend coming up for Oklahoma starting really today with ChampU BBQ. As far as another big name, though, before we get into some camp stuff to wrap up, we talked about Jaden O'Neal last week, 2026 quarterback. Oklahoma is heavily in on him. He was at camp last week. He was in town. We talked about that last week on the show, last Friday. You guys can back and check that out if you want to hear us gush over Jaden O'Neal a little bit. But incredibly impressive player. He put out a top 10 list this week, which, it's a top 10. Oklahoma's on it, obviously. But the more noteworthy aspect here for our VIP members and guys tuned in, you feel really good about Jaden O'Neal. We've seen a couple national guys put in picks for Jaden O'Neal. You have as well. What has made you feel like Oklahoma is in position and I guess timeline or however you want to kind of forecast it for you feel like Oklahoma's in a good spot to land this kid here in the near future?
Look, 2026 quarterback dominoes are falling, and they're falling fast. I mean, Texas just picked up its quarterback commit for the 2026 cycle. A few other programs are sealing the deal with other signal callers in that cycle. And so Oklahoma, I know that Oklahoma really wanted to make sure that they were going to get one of these elite arm talents in that 2026 class. I know Seth Luttrell, look, I think we forget him taking over as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. This is going to be his first quarterback take in that role for OU. So he really was looking forward to going after the guy that he wanted. I know Brent Venables is a huge fan of Jaden O'Neal. I think this whole coaching staff is a big fan of Jaden O'Neal. And he comes into town for camp, got to work out with the staff a little bit, go through the camp a little bit later, kind of go through an unofficial visit of sorts, was even kind of around for the OV weekend and gets to just be in Norman for a couple of days and not only get some work in with the staff, but also get to know them a little bit more. Everything I've heard coming out of that weekend since, I mean, every sign points towards Oklahoma being the heavy favorite to potentially land Jaden O'Neal. And so, not the most riveting intel because, again, like you mentioned, myself and some of our other national recruiting analysts have put in crystal ball picks. So there's a natural inclination that OU's in the driver's seat here. I do think this timeline, though, as far as 2026, again, those dominoes are falling fast. I would encourage recruiting fans to hop on 24/7 Sports, go through the top 26 quarterback rankings and see how many of those guys are already either committed or crystal balled somewhere. I think OU and Jaden O'Neal are both interested in getting some sort of resolution as far as what's next in that 2026 cycle for either Jaden or OU. And I think, of course, with my pick being in there, not only do I think that could potentially go in OU's favor, I think that resolution could be revealed a little bit sooner rather than later. So I think the timeline's moving quickly for O'Neal. And if that's the case, especially considering how a recent visit went, I like where Oklahoma's sitting with this one right now.
Yeah, the timeline is the interesting aspect for this one for me. Because like I said, we talked about last week that you felt good about Oklahoma was, and obviously we talked about the level of player. He feels like an Oklahoma quarterback. He's certainly worthy of that and everything. But the timeline is interesting because, like you said, the 2026 dominoes are kind of starting to fall. We were at camp on Tuesday, and we're going to get into some camp standouts and stuff in a second. But, Tate Reynolds was there, another 2026 quarterback who holds an Oklahoma offer. He was impressive as well, not as highly touted as Jaden O'Neal, not quite as polished, but, man, he's got a cannon on him, and he's an impressive player as well. And they have more 26 quarterbacks that came in for camp and things like that. So it's just, I think it's wise of O'Neal to be like, if Oklahoma's where he wants to be and he's got other visits, and you can take your time. I don't think Oklahoma's rushing him. I don't want to give that impression, but you would, sewing that up sooner rather than later, I think is a good move for all parties. So that's the kind of interesting aspect. Obviously, again, you go back and listen last Friday on the show, we talked about it then, what we both think of Jaden O'Neal. Not that it's some hot take to say we think he's good, but if that's the way it goes, that's a guy you build around and you plan similarly to what we've thought in the past about Jackson Arnold. And certainly, the hope is for Hawkins and maybe Kevin Sperry. Jaden O'Neal's a build your 26 class around type of guy. So we'll see if that's the way it goes. We talked earlier this week about Grady Mix coming aboard and Jonathan Hatton. So that offense is kind of, it's extremely early. You got two guys, but put Jaden O'Neal in there, you're off to a nice start offensively, to say the least. Let's talk about some camp stuff on the way out. The last two camps, you've been in Norman a lot. I've been meeting you down there at Everest and the track and field there where they've been doing all the camp stuff. Tuesday and Thursday were the last two editions of the Brent Venables High School League Camp this month. Tuesday had a handful of OU commits there. Thursday did not. So that was more heavily about some guys who picked up offers. We'll get to that in a second. Let's start with the commits on Tuesday, though. Some guys that stood out. I'll start with, I really like Trinae Washington. And this is a guy that's, the 2025 tight end who's a little bit, I don't know if forgotten is the right word, but a little overlooked, maybe because of how many stud teammates he has on that Carl Albert team with Tristan Haynes, and it was Kevin Sperry and Xavier Robinson and Marcus James. Like, he's kind of the one that's a little forgotten at times. Even the way he committed, remember, it was Marcus James' commitment, and then Trinae came out and kind of surprised everyone. Like, that was Marcus James's ceremony that he also announced at. He's been really good at these camps this month, a couple of times he's been there, and in particular on Tuesday, because the first time he didn't really go through one-on-ones or anything. This last time he did, and man, he was cooking guys. I mean, just flat out cooking guys. And the highlights are on the YouTube channel from Tuesday if you want to check that out. But I wanted to make sure to kind of get him in there because, again, with the Titans they brought in, and they just had a Grady Mix of 2026. I feel like there's been a little bit of he's a little bit of the forgotten guy in that 25 class, and he's been really impressive this month. Where can forecast down the road and what kind of player he'll be remains to be seen, but he's had a nice month. So I want to make sure to get him in there. What about for you, maybe of the commits that we saw the other day that stuck out to you?
I thought one of the biggest winners of the entire OU camp stretch was Malik Hawkins. I
really agree.
I was thoroughly impressed with him over the couple of appearances that he made, but that last one that you're talking about, I was standing there with a former NFL player who had brought recruits with him. So he's supposed to be watching other players.
Yeah.
And yet he's standing next to me going, who is that? Malik Hawkins was that good, folks. And patient hands, but violent hands in coverage. Remains in the hip pocket, but even when you get him initially off the release, his recovery speed and timing, very special what he was able to accomplish during these OU camps. And I think he kind of showcased, if you'll remember, in the commit story that we did with Malik, he talked about how he felt like he was one of the best press man coverage corners in the country. When he showed up at OU's camps, what he was able to showcase, again, there were guys who played in the NFL that were asking me about Malik Hawkins. I think, again, that's a testament to what he was putting together in these settings. Malik Hawkins, legitimately, he's another one who kind of in the Trene Washington mold. I think it's a great pick by you because Trene Washington is that tight end commit for Oklahoma. And even though they've been involved with other tight ends, they've had a pretty darn good one all along. Malik Hawkins, in a world where we have the Tristan Haynes and Marcus Wimberleys and all these other big names, Oklahoma's involved with Kobe Sellers very heavily. Malik Hawkins, it was very clear. I think it's a heck of a get for Oklahoma, and there's a very real chance he makes some big-time plays. If he repeats what he did in the Everest Center during camp season, he carries that over to Norman, Oklahoma with the pads on.
I'm completely with you. No, I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to say anyone this month that was more impressive than Malik Hawkins. I mean, the best way I can describe it is he's just a nightmare if you're a receiver. I mean, he just had those guys in hell. I mean, he's so physical, and that's the main thing that jumps out. And I put up, video again on the YouTube channel, and some of our VIP members have pointed out that he's handsy. He's a little handsy. He's physical, but that's SEC, and they're not gonna, I've always been a believer with cornerbacks, defensive backs, just be aggressive. They're not gonna call it every time. You'll get dinged sometimes, but he is just so physical, and you can almost see it whenever, because of the way these one-on-ones work, and most people probably understand this, but it kind of rotates around. It's not like you're facing the same guy every time. Receivers come up, DBs come up. And when receivers come up and it's Malik who jumps in it's like oh God, I don't want to deal with this guy. I'm trying to show off. I'm trying to impress coaches. That's not the guy you want, because he's going to jam you up and he's going to make life hard for you. He was really, really good all month. Like I say, if I had to pick one guy who was the MVP of the month, the entire thing, it probably is Malik Hawkins. He was really, really good. As far as guys who picked up offers, had a few that fall in that category, certainly the last couple of camps. In particular, yesterday on the defensive line, this was a fun one. Joseph Graves from Booker T. Washington up there in Tulsa. It didn't take long for him to be okay, who is that? One of those situations. He was mainly working inside, and he was beating his man a lot in one-on-ones. Became clear pretty quick that Todd Bates was interested, who was paying very close attention, and then he calls Brent Venables over to pay very close attention, which is usually a pretty good giveaway of the way things were trending. He was really fun. Obviously, he's an in-state guy up there in Tulsa, just a 2027. So he's got 3 years of high school left, and he's got good size already. Did pick up an OU offer after camp yesterday. He was a lot of fun to watch. Collin, you feel free to chip in on him, but he was impressive, and one of the guys who picked up an offer yesterday. What about for you, either on him or other guys who picked up offers yesterday?
No, I'm right there with you. He's, from what I've heard, kind of been the talk of the town out there in that greater Tulsa area, and so
big winner yesterday. Yeah.
It's one of those where you hear about an in-state player who's generated a lot of buzz where he's from, and then that momentum carries into the camp setting for the in-state program, and he gets that offer, that opportunity. Really cool to see. And I know a lot of folks in his camp were super excited when the news came through. So that also kind of adds a layer to the equation as far as him being a big winner of the camp. But I'm right there with you as well. 2027 defensive line. Let's stick right there. Let's talk crew downs. So Crew Jones comes from Utah all the way to Norman, Oklahoma for a camp. And if I remember correctly, he was going through a group and he's going through positional drills. And then Miguel Chavis not only pulls him aside and gets one-on-one work with him for a long time. Mm-hmm. Miguel Chavis then is like, no, go with this group. And it was kind of the top group, a collection of edge rushers that they had their eye on as far as the top of the board. And so they pulled him, sent him into that group after getting some one-on-one work with Miguel Chavis, and he time and again delivered, being part of that collection of talent. One-on-one settings was outstanding. Inevitably gets that offer and goes home back to the state of Utah, getting that opportunity at OU. That's about as good as it gets when we're talking camp performances. Very big congratulations goes out to Crew Jones to take that leap of faith and take that flight all the way out to this side, and then all of a sudden you're coming home with a big time Power 4 offer.
Yeah, talk about making the trip worth it for sure. Yeah, really twitchy. He was fun to watch. Just kind of like what I was saying about Todd Bates. Was really paying attention to Graves. That was Chavis with Crew Jones. You could tell pretty quick that he's talking to him a lot. He's very interested, and like you said, got the offer. I will throw in one more kind of bonus one. It's just kind of a fun. Just Nelson Peterson was there, which is a fun one. I was a younger brother of OU legend Adrian Peterson. He's a 2026 quarterback. He's a 4-star prospect. Obviously, we just talked about Jaden O'Neal and Tate Reynolds, so I would say highly unlikely that Nelson ends up at Oklahoma, at least as 26 quarterback signee. But he was at camp yesterday. He's got really good size and arm strength, and he was impressive. He's not polished. I mean, he's raw. Some of the deep balls, stuff like that, you can tell there needs some work, but the framework is there for him to be something. We kind of talked about would he be willing to move positions? We'll see. He does have a couple of offers as a quarterback and notable ones. Ole Miss and Texas Tech. So, but he's a fun one. It was just kind of cool that he was there. He was, because of the name, it was we'll see what he looks like. But he's much more than just. He's a 4-star prospect. He really is a talented, athletic kid. So he was a fun one, and be very interested to see where he winds up down the road too. That was pretty cool. I think that's it. Good show. ChampU BBQ this weekend. Again, 60% off right now to become a VIP member. We're going to have a lot of intel coming in over the course of the weekend. Again, transfer portal is going for the Diamond Sports right now, especially. We're all over that as well. Team intel as the summer rolls on. Media days are coming up. Fall camp. It's a phenomenal time to jump aboard, become a VIP member. Tom, James, and myself will be back with you on Monday. Got some things to get into. Brent Venables signed a pretty nice extension today. We're going to talk about that on Monday, as well as some of that portal stuff I refer to. CK and I'll be back with you probably next Thursday, I'm assuming, and we'll be wrapping up ChampU BBQ and anything else that we want to get into on the recruiting side of it for then. So, CK, safe travels back to DFW. You don't have to make the trip up to Norman for a little while, so enjoy that. And we'll reconvene next week.
Yeah, at least I don't think so, unless something. Who knows? You never know in the world of recruiting, but you can be in the know if you sign up for Sooners Illustrated at 60% off. I'm not gonna lie, that one felt way better in my head, but
it was solid. It was a good little segue. It was a bar.
Anyway, I'm tired from all these camps and being in the sun, so I'm gonna go home and make that drive. But folks, come join us. The OU community has made Sooners Illustrated an awesome place to be, and it's 60% off at a time where the biggest recruiting event of the summer is taking place. I don't know of a better time, and looking forward to these summer months, folks. I know we talk about the official visits a lot, but don't forget July, August is commit season, and you will be able to access all that coverage as well with this VIP special going on today. So,
100%. All right, man. Pop some caffeine gum and get in the car and head on home. All right.
Are you a fan? I hope to see that you buy some caffeine gum very soon.
I might have to purchase. For those early mornings during the season, especially. I might need it. That's it for now. We'll see you back here next week. Be sure to subscribe, obviously, to Sooners Illustrated, but also to the YouTube channel and the podcast wherever you get it. That really helps us out. We'll be back next Monday with Tom and James. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you guys next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.